Okay, today we're going to talk about lack of mobility in the shoulders and the mid-back. People who tend to develop this work at a desk for a living, driving, traveling, anytime that your body's kind of forward and like this, texting on a cell phone. What happens is you do that for enough hours during the day, and that's slowly what your body becomes. What happens as a result of that is you lose mobility in your shoulders, they start to round over, your pecs get tight, your traps get tight, head starts to come forward like this, rhomboids start to get stretched out, and what you do is you just create this amazing imbalance in your upper body. CrossFit athletes who experience this have difficulty doing kipping, pull-ups, any type of rowing motion because you can't get those shoulders back and active. And what ends up happening is you end up with shoulder pain, rotator cuff issues, tennis elbow, because you're losing mobility in those areas and you're trying to make up for it somewhere else. So what we're going to do today is just have head coach at Reebok CrossFit Bear Cove, Mike Lejeune, take you through some moves to go ahead and correct those problems, get your head back, increase that mobility, and develop some strength in those rhomboids so you get those shoulders nice and active.
Hey guys, I'm Mike Lejeune, the head coach at Reebok CrossFit Bear Cove. Here today to talk to you guys on how do we fix those problems that Dr. Oliveri just mentioned. And it really comes down to three things. One is improving our mobility, two is our flexibility, and three is the overall stability. So I want to start with the mobility, and that's really how do we move into the proper positions. And so I'm going to show you guys about 3 or 4 things today on how do we attack this whole region. And I'm going to start with the pecs, so those chest muscles. As we get tight, one of the best ways we can alleviate that tightness is actually with the use of a simple lacrosse ball. So I'm going to start by simply taking that lacrosse ball, put it right around my pectoral muscle, make it right up against a pole or a wall or whatever it may be. I'm going to drive some pressure up there, and I'm just going to move my arm throughout that range of motion. And I can kind of move that around, find a sticky spot, and I want to do this at least 2 to 3 minutes. So every kind of mobility thing that we do, we found that the biggest effectiveness is in that zone. So we're just moving back and forth to alleviate that tension. Now we're going to move up a little bit in towards the trap area. So focusing on 2 areas, the upper and then also the mid. So I'm simply going to take that same lacrosse ball, I'm going to put it right behind that upper trap, I'm going to lay down on the floor, and then I'm going to lift my hips up off the ground so it now puts a lot of weight all focused here. And once again, I'm going to move my arm throughout that range of motion. And what I want you to notice is I have external rotation. So on my left side, my thumb's going to point towards the sky as it's by my side. I'm going to move it through, touch that ground. Think about keeping that arm straight with my bicep touching right next to my ear. Just back and forth. Once again, I'm going to do that 2 to 3 minutes. We can do the same thing with our mid trap. So right inside of that shoulder blade, I can do that same positioning. Once again, lifting my hips up off the ground to add more weight. External rotation, moving my arm throughout that full range of motion. Okay. Now when we're done with that, we also want to focus on our lats. So I'm going to leave this lacrosse ball for a bit in favor of a foam roller. And I simply externally rotate once again, right? So I'm going to face up towards the ceiling, so rotating towards the external of my body. And now I'm going to focus on my lat, picking my hips up off the ground to have that weight really focus on the lat, just moving back and forth. I can even rotate my body a little bit forward or a little bit backwards just to find where is that hurting me the most. And once again, I'm going to stay there for about 2 to 3 minutes. All right, so another couple of things that we're going to focus on is one of what we call the banded bully, and 2 is super front rack. So when we think about mobility issues with our shoulders, as Dr. Oliveri mentioned, a lot of times we get those shoulders kind of caving in. When my shoulder is set forward, I don't have that range of motion. So how can we start pushing those shoulders back into the socket where they belong? Well, the great way to do that is what we call the banded bully. So I'm going to use a band, some sort of overhead structure like a pull-up bar. I'm going to drive my arm straight through, behind my back, and I'm going to step forward. And what you're seeing is happening here is just pulling that shoulder back into the socket. Once again, I want to keep about 2 to 3 minutes. I'm just going to kind of hang out in this position, just let that shoulder get pulled straight back. The other thing that we can do to really improve our ability for our shoulders to get back, our elbows to get up in that front rack position, as we call it in CrossFit, is what we call the super front rack. So I can take this band, I'll tie it right around some sort of pole or other permanent structure. And I'm simply going to grab it with my hand, drive my elbow up, and step forward with my head and chest through, and really working on that mobility of my shoulder, being able to get up. Once again, holding that for a couple minutes.